Good afternoon. My name is Dan Wright, and I'm your host for TechDiver Chronicles 3. And today, my guest is Gary Gentile, esteemed author and diver. At what point did you start photographing these shipwrecks? What cameras did you use, and how did it work out for you in those days?
I started shooting film almost as soon as I started diving. I bought an Iconis 2 camera in the early 70s, and uh, and I didn't get really big into photography for a while, but I just kept at it. And quite frankly, shooting underwater photographs off the New Jersey coast is difficult because visibility usually at its best is 20 feet, and we often dive in worse visibility, so it was really a poor place to practice. But I kept at it and kept updating my camera gear. And as people always ask me now that we're in a different situation where we're not using film, they say, well, how was it in the film days? And I said, well, I would go on a trip, like let's say a week-long trip, and I'd take pictures all week, and I get back and people say, oh, how was your trip? And I said, well, I don't know. I'll let you know in 2 weeks when I get my film back. That's the way it was in the old days. You just didn't know what you were getting. Now, I know I was very happy when I bought my first camera, my first electronic camera, and and I was able to see what the pictures looked like as soon as I pushed the shutter release. It was great. And then I say, oh, no, that's no good. I need more light, or the strobe needs to be closer, or it needs to be farther away. Oh, it was a godsend, believe me. But still, even with the foul conditions I had, I did manage to publish a lot of photos. At this point, about 4,000, mostly to magazines. And in fact, in most cases, they illustrated my own articles because I was writing magazine articles in the early days. And so published them in magazines, books, advertisements, all kinds of things, anything that was underwater related. And then when I started my own publishing business, I started using my pictures in my own books. So I not only wrote the books and furnished the photographs for them, but I published the books myself without having to wait for somebody else to say, no, I don't know, I don't like that sentence, or I don't like that paragraph, or I think you should drop this chapter, because I went through all that when I was writing mostly novels, science fiction novels. So having my own publishing business meant that I had total control. And that's what part of the reason for switching from film. It's not really why I switched from film, but it certainly did enable me to be more productive because I could tell on the site what my picture looked like. And any photographer today knows that's what they do. They take a picture, they look at it and say, the composition's a little off. Let's take it a little different angle. So it was a long road to hoe, but I was able to publish a lot of pictures in the early days. 90% of my published photographs, well, maybe 80%, were all published on pictures that I had taken with film.
When did you start research and writing books about shipwrecks?
Actually, before I started writing, I started doing research. And I started that in the early 1970s. I would say 72, 73. I started really early because I was so fascinated by them. And what I did was, I at the time I was working as an electrician, and I sometimes would work on on a weekend and have a day off during the week. And on those days, I would carpool with Eric Gray, and he lived in Westchester. I would drive from my house to his house, and then we'd drive from his house down to Washington, D.C., and we both did shipwreck research. Well, I continued that just because I was interested in it, not because I had any idea of writing about it. But I just kept compiling information, and after about 15 years, I had so much information that I just decided that, well, maybe I should write a book about New Jersey shipwrecks that I'm diving on. And there was an outfit called Sea Sports Publication, which was publishing books about underwater topics. And they decided they would like to have me write a book about New Jersey shipwrecks. So I wrote about a book called Shipwrecks in New Jersey in 1988. So excited about writing shipwreck books, I decided to do another one. Well, I did another one on shipwrecks of, what was my next one? I think the next one was North Carolina. And the publication company wasn't able to move that fast. They were thinking, well, maybe in a couple of years, yeah, we'll do this. And I already had, and I was writing, what I was doing was writing a chapter at a time, because each one is, each book contains chapters about a single wreck. So I would pick out a wreck that I really liked, that I had done a lot of diving on, had done a lot of writing on, a lot of reading on, and I would write that, and I had finished manuscripts in parts all up and down the coast. And I finally decided I need to move faster than this. I've got books ready to go, and Sea Sports Publications, no, they're not ready to jump on it. So I started my own publishing business. And as I said earlier, I borrowed $20,000, part of which was to subsidize the monitor case, and other part I used to publish my first book, which was the Andrea Doria, Dive to an Era. And once I did that, then I just kind of went bonkers. I started writing book after book in between my science fiction novels. And finally, the last book I published was my 69th book. So, and in about 2 months, I should finish number 70.
You've discovered more than 40 wrecks. Are they by chance or deliberate action?
Go out to search for a wreck, you may never find anything and come home without getting wet. Or you may find something accidental, or you may find what you're actually looking for. Now, in the case of the Billy Mitchell wrecks, we knew what we were looking for. But it took us 6 years to find them all and put all the pieces together. There was one, the battleship, the Ostfriesland being a battleship. There was the cruiser Frankfurt. There were 3 destroyers and 3 submarines, or U-boats. The only one of the Billy Mitchell wrecks that we did not find was the U-111. There were supposed to be 4 U-boats out there, but there were only 3. Now, the reason we didn't find it is because the U-111 sank accidentally before the trial was started for scuttling the other German U-boats. And it wasn't raised until the following year. It was it was visible all that time. It was in shallow water off the approaches to the Chesapeake Bay. And so finally, a year later, the U-boat was raised. It was pumped out, raised, and towed off to sea to be scuttled, because they weren't going to do any testing for us. With the Billy Mitchell wrecks, you know, the most popular thing about it is Billy Mitchell got to bomb the battleship and prove that battleships could be sunk by aerial bombardment, which the Navy did not want to believe. And some of the other ships, some of the other submarines and destroyers were also bombed by Billy Mitchell's fleet. And then some were scuttled by means of naval gunnery. But the U-111 escaped that because it had accidentally sunk. So it was towed out, And I had been doing research in 1980, so I knew the whole backstory because it was part of the Billy Mitchell research that I was doing, mostly at the Library of Congress. I knew that it had been scuttled, they said, according to the deck log of the vessel. It was the Falcon, which was a salvage vessel. I went and got the deck log, and it gave the position, and it said that it was sunk in 1,296 feet. It was given in fathoms, 266 fathoms. So I just like wrote that one off the book. I mean, I made a mark on my chart and I put down U11, but when I put that down on the chart, the position didn't match the depth. Or I should say the depth didn't match the position. The depth was like 400 and no, the depth was closer to like 500 or 600 feet. And I just wrote that one off. Well, we're not diving that one. So then, skip like decades later, in 2018, Ted Green, who ran a shop in Salisbury, Maryland, and had his own dive boat and ran dive charters, and was not only a rebreather diver, but he was a rebreather instructor trainer. But Ted had finally reached a point at which he didn't want to dive 400 feet anymore, even though he had a rebreather that was capable of doing that. So he gave me a set of numbers, which the fisherman called the Olinda. Now he got these numbers from a fisherman, and that's where he got the depth and the location and the name. So he said, I don't really want to dive that deep, but you might be able to use this information, because he knew that I had written about the Olinda since I covered it in my Virginia book, which he sold at his shop. So he said, this is where it's supposed to be. So I put it away. That was in 2018. Now, 2 years later, right at the end of 2019, there was a press release claiming that the scuba diver had found, not dived one, but had found by side scan sonar a wreck of the R8. Now, I knew about the R8, but I had never covered it in my books. It was supposed to be half a mile deep, and it was not really historic in any way. It was taken out and scuttled. So I went and looked it up on my chart, and I had it written there. I had a picture or a dot where it's supposed to be located, and didn't think much about it until I thought, well, I guess I'll let me take a look at my chart again. And I didn't do that until after somebody told me. And there was a lot of rumor going on about this R8 wreck, where it was located and all that. And I said, well, I know where it is. It's historically known wreck. and then I heard, well, no, it's not off the Virginia Capes. Well, yes, it is. That's where the R8 is located. Well, then I come to find that the wreck hadn't been found off the Virginia Capes. It had been found way up north, close to the boundary line with Maryland. And I thought, no, that's not right. Well, then I found that it's supposed to be, and this was just word of mouth that was spreading throughout the community, that it was supposed to be Ted's numbers. I said, well, wait a minute. I have Ted's numbers. I already marked them. So I looked it up, and I saw, oh, that's interesting. It's only 2 miles. It's only 3 miles, 3.5 miles from the U111, which I had marked in 1989. So then the press release, certain press releases released different pieces of information, different photos, different paragraphs. Some were left out, some were edited. But I found one that showed an image of the side scan sonar. So I looked at that, and I realized that the image could not have been the R8 because the R8 had a 2-story conning tower. And then I pulled out my location, and I said, well, that's strange. The R8's right next to the U-111. And then I pulled out a picture of the U-111, and it had a 1-story conning tower. And I realized that what had been misdescribed as the R8 was in fact the U-111. This took me over the course of a month or so because it was all information coming from word of mouth, because the person who went out to take the side scan image would not share his information. So we didn't even know they were TED numbers at first. Anyway, at that point, I said, this is the U-111. The only problem was I was the only one who knew the backstory, and no one else would believe that I found a World War I submarine, or let's say that I identified a World War I U-boat off the American coast. Nobody thought that any others existed because I was the only one who had that information. Ken Clayton unfortunately passed away in 2017, and I'm really sorry that he didn't live long enough to see the completion of our project into locating the U-111. He would have been excited about that, since we found all the other Billy Mitchell wrecks. So anyway, that's one of those things about research. It's all different. I didn't find the wreck. I didn't know its location. That was given to me, but I had correctly identified it. And well, like I said, finding wrecks and identifying wrecks is catch or catch can. Sometimes you don't find it when you expect to find it. Sometimes you don't find it where you expect to find it. And then sometimes you never find it at all.
Okay,
I have one thing that I wrote down.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, we can do this one first, but only because it's funny.
Okay.
And
yeah, humor's needed.
Yeah, you want to add some more of that. So once we knew what the Sebastian was and where it was, we went back there several times over the years. And on one of these occasions, I don't remember exactly why, I made one dive during the day, and for some reason, I didn't make a second dive, and I don't know why. But a storm was coming in, and the skipper thought, we need to leave. And we need to leave now before it comes in. And it was already nighttime. Because we were planning to stay an overnight trip. We were planning to stay overnight and dive the next day. So I was the only one who had enough time, sit time, to go down to 250 feet and retrieve the grapnel. So I said, all right, well, I'll go. So I got I got dressed, got my light, get in the water. Now you have to understand what I'm doing. A 250-foot deep night dive solo. So I know it sounds kind of spooky, but to me it was like exciting. You know, I wasn't scared about it. I was like, I've been on this wreck before. I know what it's like. So I went down the anchor line. I got down to the bottom. I got to the hook, and I pulled it free, and I was supposed to be there, I think, at 5 minutes. In other words, at 5 minutes, what would happen? And I had to time everything perfectly. At 5 minutes, I had to be there at the hook. And the skipper was going to release slack. He was going to feed me slack so the grapnel would be loose. So I got up there right at 5 minutes, and I was waiting. The slack came, and I pulled the hook, threw it off the wreck, and it was released. I held onto the rope, of course. Held onto the anchor line. And then it swung like a pendulum. It swung down to the bottom. And I just kind of worked my way up the line. I had my computer, so I did my decompression by the computer. And I got up part way, and the line went vertical, which meant that the grapnel was not on the bottom anymore, so it was not going to hook on anything. So the boat just basically went adrift. So it's an easy decompression. It just like hanging on to the anchor line, and we're moving along. So I got up to my stops, and I turned the light off. I didn't know. I was going to be at that first stop. It was like, I think 130 feet, but only for 2 minutes. And then I had individual stops. So when I got up to like 50 feet, I looked at the computer, and it's all going to be here for 5 minutes. So I turned off my light. And I just kind of hung out in the total darkness. It was really neat. It was like being in a sensory deprivation tank. I felt really cool about it because I couldn't see anything, and I felt perfectly at ease because I'm just like hanging out, drifting along. And then after a while, I turned the light on. So when I got up to the 20-foot stop, I saw where it was. Oh, I'm going to be here for like 15 minutes. So I switched the light off. Okay, so what I did not know, in my ignorance, having a good time, just cruising along in a sensory deprivation ocean, is that there were sharks surrounding the boat. And they could see them. The crew and the other customers on the boat could see with their lights. When they looked down, they could see shapes swimming by. What they didn't see was my dive light. So now they're all upset. I mean, and I'm looking around. I see lights shining here and lights shining over there. What the heck is going on here? So then I got to the 10-foot stop, and I again switched off the light. They were very concerned that I was gone, that I had been eaten by a shark. And I was happy in ignorance. And when I finally came up to the ladder, everybody started screaming, "Where were you? Where were you? We couldn't see you. There were sharks swimming around." I said, "Oh, I switched off my light." and everybody else was like scared to death that I was dead. And here I didn't know anything that was going on that was wrong. I was having a good old time. So, it was a fun dive for me. I really enjoyed it. It was my deepest night dive, if you can look at it that way. And I said, well, have fun. It was, nothing untoward happened. It was a good, easy dive, and I had a good time. And then we headed for home. We didn't end up getting overrun by any bad weather, so it was good in that regard. It's come to me that a quote has been attributed to me, and I want to correct that attribution. The quote goes, "If you can hook it, we can dive it." That's one of those real macho things. But the person who actually made that quote was Mike DeCamp. And it was on a trip. I'm sure he was diving with George Hoffman in the old days. It would have been in either the late 60s or early 70s. And I was on a trip sometime in, I'd say, the early 80s. And I went out with Gene Peterson. We were diving in Halifax in Canada. And we went on to this wreck. And at the dock, it was pretty nice. But once we got out to the wreck site, it was bad. And the thing about the wreck is it's on an island, and there are rocks all surrounding the island. And so he pulled up onto where he would normally drop the hook, and the boat was really rocking badly. And if the current goes wrong, of course, it could push you onto the rocks. So he came over to me, and I was the trip organizer, and he said, "Oh, Gary, it looks pretty rough today. Looks pretty rough." And I said, "If you can hook it, we can dive it." And then instantly I regretted saying it, because he looked at me, he looked out the window, he reached behind him and pulled a flask out of his rear pocket. He unscrewed the cap, he took a drink, screwed on the cap, put the bottle back in his pocket, and he looked at me and he said, "Gary, we cannot dive it." And the look of pity on his face made me feel so bad that I never made that statement again.
What is your ultimate plan with bequeathing all your studies and your artifacts?
I've got a house full of artifacts and a room full of historical research. And I've already made provision in my will that all the artifacts and research should go to Deb Whitcraft at the New Jersey Maritime Museum. She already has some of my stuff there. Some of our research and some of my artifacts. But rather than have them be lost or thrown in the trash, I've already bequeathed them to her, or to the museum if she predeceases me.